Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritta Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udiriye Nastaprayashu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Tamashloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. Hare Krishna to all assembled Vaishnavas. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on this most glorious Srimad Bhagavatam. So today we are just reading from Canto 4, Chapter 14, Text 15 and 16. And the title of the chapter we're reading from is The Story of King Vena. So text 15. Dharma chirta pumsam vanmana kaya buddhibihi okan vishokan vitarati athanantyam asanginam. Dharma, religious principles. Achirita, executed. Pumsam, to persons. Vak, by words. Mana, mind. Kaya, body. Buddhivi, and by intelligence. Lokan, the planets. Vishokan, without misery. Vitarati, bestow. Atha, certainly. Anantyam, unlimited happiness, liberation. Asanginam, to those free from material influence. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Those who live according to religious principles and who follow them by words, mind, body, and intelligence are elevated to the heavenly kingdom, which is devoid of all miseries. Being thus rid of material influence, they achieve unlimited happiness in life. Purport. The saintly sages herein instruct that the king or head of government should set an example by living a religious life. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, religion means worshiping the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One should not simply make a show of religious life, but should perform devotional service perfectly with words, mind and body, and good intelligence. By doing so, not only will the king or government head rid himself of the contamination of the material modes of nature, but the general public will also, and they will all become gradually elevated to the kingdom of God and go back home, back to Godhead. The instructions given herein serve as a summary of how the head of government should execute his ruling power and thus attain happiness, not only in this life, but also in the life after death. I'll read text 16, the translation and purport as well. The sages continued, O great hero, for this reason you should not be the cause of spoiling the spiritual life of the general populace. If their spiritual life is spoiled because of your activities, you will certainly fall down from your opulent and royal positions. Purport. Formerly, in practically all parts of the world, there was Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishavamstra Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Baridana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Dandavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bevacha Patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everyone. So, please accept my humble obeisances. I beg the blessings from all the assembled Vaishnavas so that we may have a fruitful discussion today on this most glorious Srimad Bhagavatam. I have no qualification to speak in the assembly of all Vaishnavas, but we'll try to repeat what I've heard from other great acharyas commenting on these verses and other topics in Srimad Bhagavatam. So, in this 15th and 16th verse, we are in the section of this pastime of King Vena, who has been ruling according to his nature, which is not such a good nature, due to his family lineage, we can say, particularly on the maternal side. He has acquired some qualities that have leading to not proper ruling of society. And so the sages have now developed a plan, and they are trying to advise and correct King Vena in his rule. And so this verse 15 and 16 are their first of advice. In verse 14, they approach King Vena with the idea of trying to correct his behavior. And the interesting aspect of this is we see that the sages, they were actually the ones in charge, not the kings. They are prepared, if King Vena does not take to this advice, to then remove him from power through some very interesting ways. Due to their great potency, these sages are very, very powerful. And so the kings are actually ruling under the guidance of the sages. And we'll talk a fair bit about that today as the right model for leadership. Because society is to be led by the Brahmanas. You know, a society not led by the Brahmanas is basically a headless society. People running around without heads, trying to accomplish things. It is not such a productive situation. And that is the scenario in which we exist when leaders of society are performing their duty not under the guidance of the Brahmanas. So the sages here are giving King Vena a chance to correct, which is a very nice and compassionate approach. When someone is not doing what is supposed to be done, we try to correct with love and compassion, with good advice. But if such corrective action does not take place, then the sages are prepared to remove King Vena, which we'll see later in this chapter. So Prabhupada comments at the end of the purport that this instructions given herein serve as a summary of how the head of government should execute the ruling power. So I was debating a few different approaches to today's discussion, and I didn't make a great decision, so I thought we could do both, with your permission. So I thought we could speak a little bit about the king's duties as a leader. Actually, the entire Srimad Bhagavatam is filled with stories of how kings have ruled, mostly of how kings have ruled very well, but also in scenarios like this where kings have not ruled well and what the situations are. So we can take many lessons from that. We'll speak about this engagement of the body, mind, and words with good intelligence in devotional service. That is the core of the advice King Vena is receiving. And then we'll discuss a little bit about the results of such leadership. Who benefits? Both the leader and the subjects. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then at the end, I thought we could take this and go into a little bit of a broader context of discussion around leadership. And look at how today's leadership theories, particularly in the business world, there are great theories on how to lead successfully, and so many books are written. Consultants are charging lots and lots of money to hear about this. But interestingly, these topics that are presented today, we see them vividly described in Srimad Bhagavatam about how to lead. And so I thought we could draw some parallels from Srimad Bhagavatam with these modern, so-called leadership theories. So we'll conclude with that. So we'll talk, a fair bit about leadership today, given the discussion the sages are having with King Vena on his maybe lack of appropriate leadership. So in verse 4, Srila Prabhupada comments in the purport that the kings were also great sages. We say Rajarshis, Raja Rishis. So they were kings who were great sages. They were saintly kings. They're not the sinful kings that we see today, or sinful leaders, whether we call it kings or presidents, prime ministers, it's all of the same genre. And Prabhupada is commenting that the opulences that they achieved were the result of great yoga practice. So these were acquired potencies by the practice of yoga. And the primary duty of the king is to protect the citizens. But in protecting the citizens, again, we must know where to direct our protective efforts. And the king's responsibility is not to just protect the body, the physical existence of the citizens, but to protect and enhance the spirit soul's destination within this world, and ultimately returning them back home, back to Godhead. So the goal of the kings is to uplift society to the platform of spiritual life. That is the entire goal. This protection is not to build a barrier and to create a moat and a wall to allow for unlimited sense gratification peacefully. That is not the protection the king is supposed to give. The protection the king is supposed to give is to protect the destiny of that soul, the destination, of that soul, and return it back to its eternal constitutional position. And a critical aspect of the king's duty we see throughout Srimad Bhagavatam, and we see in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains that this establishing of the Varnashram system, this is the duty of the king, is to establish Varnashram Dharma. And I think tomorrow's verse will speak more elaborately about that, so I won't speak too much about this. But in general, the purpose, the goal of the king is to establish Varnashram Dharma so that society may be nicely situated. Varnashram Dharma is a system that can organize society in conjunction with one's qualities and natures, and put them into a suitable mode of work, activity, that will allow them to achieve the higher purpose of life, which is self-realization. So Varnashram Dharma is like creating a suitable environment from which then people will be living very peacefully and happily, so that they can take to the process of self-realization. It is not to create an environment so that one can enjoy the realms of sense gratification. Because the pursuit of such, we know, ends in misery. It does not yield any good result for the followers. So this is the goal of the king, is to uplift the citizens to self-realization. The king is responsible for establishing and overseeing this Varnashram Dharma system. And as Srila Prabhupada comments here in the beginning of the purport, that the kings are to lead by example, right? That the saintly kings hear and instruct that the king or head, the saintly sages hear and instruct that the king or head of government should set an example by living a religious life. So this setting example we see, again, coming from Bhagavad Gita, in the 20th and 21st verse of 3rd chapter. Krishna is speaking about how one must perform their duty, even if they have no duty to perform, to set an example for all others to follow. And Srila Prabhupada comments there that a leader must teach by their own example. That is the definition of Acharya, one who preaches by example, not in the hypocritical means. In one of the purports, Prabhupada comments that a leader who smokes cannot teach someone to stop smoking. It doesn't work that way. And so we see even Krishna himself performed various activities as an example. He went to Gurukul. He is the source of all knowledge. Yet he went to Gurukul. He performed, Guru Dakshina. He offered Guru Dakshina back to his spiritual master as a means of leading an example. He showed various activities in his Dwarka Lila. Like that. We see Lord Ram set an example of how to rule in a very proper way. And we can see that when one rules in such a way, very powerful and very beautiful outcomes occur. During the reign of Lord Ram, it's explained, Shukadev Goswami is explaining in the 9th canto, that the age became like Satyuga. Though it was Treta Yuga, the perfect rule, according to the system, created such an environment that it could transcend the yugas and go to the great qualities of a prior yuga. That is the power of a great leader. Lord Ram's rule was so wonderful, and the result was so powerful and benefits for society, that it is said that all the bodily and mental suffering, disease, old age, bereavement, lamentation, all these things were completely absent. Even went one step further. It said even death for those who did not want it was absent. So this is the result of great leadership. One can even make death go away for those who do not want it. Of course, those of us who are pursuing the path of self-realization realize that death is just another step towards returning back home to Godhead. But we get some indication of what great leadership can result in. So the sages here are advising King Vena, to follow the religious principles. And religion, as Prabhupada indicates here in the purport, means to worship the Supreme Lord. We have one Sanatana Dharma, one eternal occupation. Being part and parcel of Krishna, our only activity is to render the loving devotional service to Krishna. And thus, Krishna explains at the end of Bhagavad Gita, abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. So the sages are advising King Vena that to follow these religious principles with body, with mind, with words, guided by intelligence. Right? So the body, mind, and words, this is the means by which we offer ourselves to Krishna. And we use our intelligence to guide the activities of the body, mind, and words. So these four combine to show us how to practice spiritual life. And Prabhupada is commenting here that one should not make a show of religious life. Religion is not about, showing up at some yajna to make a political statement, or to gain the favor of society, or to participate, when it's convenient or during certain, times of the year where cultural norms suggest. No, spirituality is the means by which one should offer everything, one's entire body, mind, and words, to the service of the Lord. Understanding that we are meant only for the pleasure of Krishna. So everything that we have, it should be used in the service of Krishna. So, but this intelligence is a very important aspect of this application. We see Rupa Goswami guides us in Nectar of Instruction that how to make success in devotional life. And he gives us this verse, Utsahan Nischaya Dharya Tatat Karma Pravartanat Sangha Tyaga Satogatihi Sadir Bhakti Prasiddhiti. To make success in bhakti, one should follow these 6 principles. And the first principle is Utsahan. That one should endeavor with intelligence. So not just do something, be active, but to be active with intelligence. So how to intelligently use the body, the mind, our words in the service of Krishna is a very, very important aspect of this. And we see in Srimad Bhagavatam, great kings understanding this very well. Ambarish Maharaj, was a great example. Used all parts of his body in the service of the Lord. He would use his head to offer obeisances, his hands to sweep the floor, his legs to take to various places of pilgrimage. Like this, he was using his body in all aspects of service. We use our words to speak and to glorify the Supreme Lord. One should use words only for the glorification of Krishna. Again, from Nectar of Instruction, we see this vacho vegam. This vegam, this urge to speak is very strong and profound. But what to speak, that we need some intelligence to know. And we are being encouraged that to use this urge of speak in a productive way. And that productive way is to glorify Krishna. And Krishna is defined broadly, meaning Krishna and all of his associates and different pastimes, activities, forms, names, qualities, and such. So this urge to speak should be utilized. Otherwise, it is like the croaking toad, as Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport of this first verse of Nectar of Instruction. The croaking toad is only calling the snake and inviting death by announcing where it is in the forest to the snake. So talking nonsense, this prajalpa, is only detrimental to our life. And one should use one's mind to think about Krishna. Fill one's mind with thoughts of Krishna. So like this, the sages are advising King Vena, use your body, mind, and words intelligently in the service of Krishna. And this body, mind, and words, it's a core principle of our Vaishnava philosophy. Srila Prabhupada comments throughout Srimad Bhagavatam, throughout Chaitanya Charitamrita, and other places about our Vaishnava sannyasis. They are called Tridandi sannyasis. Why Tridandi? Tridandi, Srila Prabhupada comments, is meant to exemplify that the Vaishnava sannyasi uses their body, their mind, and their words in the service of Krishna. And thus they are Tridandi. In the pastime of Lord Nityananda, breaking the danda of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We know that he breaks the danda into 3 pieces. Not 2, but he breaks them into 3 pieces. In one of the commentaries, for the reason of this, is to, clarify that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is showing us the path of this Vaishnava sannyas ashram, in which body, mind, and words are being used in the service of Krishna. Srila Rupa Goswami in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu further speaks about this body, mind, and intelligence. He says a person acting in Krishna consciousness, in the service of Krishna, with body, mind, intelligence, and words, is a liberated person, even within this material world. So the point here is that even within this material world, engage in so many material activities, one can be using the body, mind, and words in the service of Krishna. So it is very practical. Whether we are a king in leadership, as King Vena is being advised to do here, or whatever we may be doing in our different occupations, as grahasta, as brahmachari, as sannyasi, vanaprastha, whether we are a shudra or a vaishya or a kshatriya or a brahmana, this application is very broad. That the how to use the body, mind, and words, even within this material world, Srila Rupa Goswami is giving in the Nectar of Devotion. And we see this again in different parts of Srimad Bhagavatam when Prahlad Maharaj is explaining the 9 processes of devotional service. The last process of devotional service, he says, is Atma Nivedanam. And Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur comments on this Atma Nivedanam, meaning that it refers to offering to Krishna everything, including one's body, mind, and words. So the point here is whatever we possess, it is being offered to Krishna. So we see this in the pastime of Prahlad Maharaj. In the 10th canto, there's a very nice purport. In the 10th canto, 14th chapter, the 3rd verse. And the presentation of this body, mind, and words is coming from various different angles that I thought might be interesting for us to discuss. Vishnav Chakravarti Thakur is commenting on the body, mind, and words, similar to what we've already discussed, how one should use the body in the service of Krishna by touching the ground with his hands and offering obeisances. One should engage his words in praising the transcendental literatures like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. And one should engage the mind by thinking and feeling this great reverence and pleasure in hearing the transcendental topics of the Lord. So like this, Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur is commenting on how to use the body, mind, and words. And Sanatana Goswami, this is all again within the purport that Srila Prabhupada is presenting, provides kind of another angle, a vision about this body, mind, and words, and how the devotee is able to conquer Krishna with his body, with his mind, and with his words. And he speaks about with his body, the devotee touches the feet of Krishna. And with his words, they call out to Krishna. And with the mind, they think about Krishna and have direct association with the Lord. Simply by thinking about him, they obtain direct audience. So like this, Sanatana Goswami is commenting that with the body, mind, and word, not only are we offering it to Krishna, but Krishna is also offering himself back. It is this reciprocal relationship that Krishna remains at the side of his devotees. Krishna is offering his body to his devotees. Krishna is always glorifying his devotees. Krishna is offering his words to his devotees. And Krishna is always thinking about his devotees. He's offering his his mind to his devotees. So not only are we being encouraged to offer everything to Krishna, as we know, everything is in a reciprocal relationship with the Lord. It is not a one-way street. And so Krishna is also offering his body, his mind, and words to his pure devotees. And so this shows a very nice relationship. So this body, mind, and words is a very core part of our Vaishnava philosophy. And this is a great advice that the sages are giving to King Vena. And so then they explain what are the benefits of doing this. What is the benefits of leading this spiritual life in such a way? And the sages are speaking to the king that he should do this to achieve this heavenly happiness, where he can enjoy unlimited happiness in life. And so this is a very, this is a karma kanda reason to follow. And then he says in the next verse, the sages say, but if you don't, you're going to suffer and fall down from everything that you have acquired. So you can acquire some good by following this, but if you don't, you're going to lose everything good that you have. On this karma kanda piece, Srila Prabhupada was speaking once, and he said, we have lived many lives. And if we don't, take to the process of self-realization, we're going to live many other lives in the future. So we've lived many lives in the past, and we're going to live many lives in the future. So why not give just one life to Krishna? Of course, he was recruiting soldiers in his army to fight against Maya. Saying, just give one life. You've already had so many, and you're going to have so many in the future. So what's the big deal? Just like if you are eating cookies every day, and one day somebody asks you, can I have your cookie? Well, if you've eaten cookies for the last 1 year every day, and you're going to be eating cookies in the future for, 1 year, it's not so difficult to renounce that one cookie that one day. So like that, Srila Prabhupada was saying, you give one life, live one life of austerity, offer to Krishna. Even if your goal is not to achieve Krishna Prema, love of Godhead, even if that's not your goal, by giving your life to Krishna, you're going to, acquire so much benedictions. You'll live many, many future lives with great opulences, great material positions. So, what is the loss? Just one life we can give, one cookie. There are many more coming. Like this, he was encouraging the boys. Of course, Srila Prabhupada is always guiding us to the higher goal. He's not guiding us, hey, take the spiritual life to achieve this heavenly happiness. And we see this directly in this purport. Because in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is not speaking about heavenly happiness. What does he say? That they will all become gradually elevated to the kingdom of God and go back home, back to Godhead. A very distinct and different outcome from heavenly happiness. Because the material heavenly planets, one may obtain, but we know once the credits are absorbed, one must come back. But Srila Prabhupada is guiding us here in the purport that the practice of engaging the body, mind, and words with intelligence in the service of Krishna to achieve the ultimate goal, which is going back home, back to Godhead, and awakening our pure love of God. And Srila Prabhupada constantly is guiding, even in the Bhagavad Gita, we see in chapter 2 and 3, everywhere where there is discussion of Nishkam Karma Yoga or Buddhi Yoga, Srila Prabhupada is commenting on Bhakti Yoga. Because he wants to bring us to the ultimate goal of life. But even if one is not aspiring for such, there is great benefit from this activity. So we see that this is the case. And one of the outcomes that the sages are speaking about here is being thus rid of the material influences. By engaging in devotional service, we rid ourselves of the material influences. We sometimes wonder when I will be able to let go of these different attachments. Well, the sages are telling King Bina, it is by bhakti, by devotional service, fully, one can do so. And how powerful bhakti is, that even a king can become free from their material influences. We worry about our material influences, but think about a king's influences. Being a king is a very difficult role. You are surrounded by so much opulence. In the midst of such opulence, how difficult it will be to be detached, to be humble. It is only a temptation for disaster, having all this royal opulence. One has to fight. The duty of a king is to protect, unlike today's leaders who protect by hiding behind closed doors You know, I was in London a couple weeks ago, and we toured this Winston Churchill's bunker. And I was thinking, he is the leader of society, and he's hiding in a bunker underground, unbeknownst to anybody, directing the war. But in Srimad Bhagavatam we see that the kings went out themselves and fought on the front lines, not sending out their soldiers in danger and they themselves staying in safety. So being a king is difficult. One has extraordinary responsibility. Managing a family or a small set of people is so difficult. What about managing a whole country or a whole planet? So these influences, these material influences are extreme. Yet bhakti, the process of devotional service, is so powerful that one can be rid of the material influences. So we see, whatever influences we may have, if it's effective for a king, it certainly will be very, very effective for us in being able to be protected from these influences. And it's done by this process of engaging the body, mind, and words with intelligence. And Prabhupada is commenting further in the purport that not only will King Vena benefit, but also the citizens will benefit. So when the king performs spiritual activities, it is for the benefit of the society, for its citizens. We see in the pastime of King Ambarish Maharaj. He was performing this vrata of following Ekadashi, Nirjala, for one whole year. We struggle once a year to perform Nirjala Ekadashi. But Ambarish Maharaj is performing for an entire year. And for what purpose? Our Acharya's comment. Not for his benefit, but for the benefit of society. He was fasting. While all of the society was eating and feasting, he was fasting for their benefit. This is the mood of a king. Right? So the citizens gather great benefit from the king's spiritual practices. But, as we see in verse 16, if the king does not do so, if the leaders do not follow these principles, it causes the spoiling of this situation for everyone. Not only will the king lose his own position and opulence, but also the followers, the subjects, will also suffer. And we see this today. So much suffering because there's not good leadership setting an example, guiding the principles of life. Instead, they're simply guiding the principles of sense gratification and lust and greed and envy. And thus we see the result. There is so much suffering around due to the lack of good leadership. So the leader is actually responsible for the citizens. Srila Prabhupada comments that a leader in society, if you hear this, I don't think anybody will ever want to lead society. But a leader obtains a percentage of all of society's both pious activities. So the king will get a percentage of all of the citizens' pious credits, but also a percentage of their sinful credits. And thus the king had a very invested interest in seeing that the citizens were acting very righteously. Because whatever sinful activities the citizens were performing, a portion of that would accrue to the king. I don't think anybody wants to be king today and accrue a portion of society's sins. It's a position of great responsibility. And the king had thus an invested interest in leading by example, in following these principles. And so this is the way in which the head of governments are supposed to rule. And if we compare and contrast the kings explained in Srimad Bhagavatam to today's leaders, the greatest of kings in Srimad Bhagavatam, they had all one characteristic. They were reluctant leaders. They were not eager to take the position of the throne, but they were willing to do it as a service. They were ruling out of duty. Leadership is not anything but service. It is a service to society. And one should be selfless in that service. So leadership is not about exploiting and enjoying the fruits of others' labor. But instead, leadership is a labor of service for the benefit of others. King Ambarish Maharaj himself was fasting, enduring austerity for the benefit of others. But today we see the complete opposite. Leaders are anxious to acquire positions so they can hoard power and resources. Okay? And there's no reluctancy in leadership. Today, leaders will spend millions of dollars and years working their way to acquire this position of leadership. But Yudhishthira Maharaj was not anxious to lead, but he was implored to lead. King Priyavrata was begged by Narada Muni and Lord Brahma, please, now lead. He was very happy, peacefully situated in his devotional service. But he left that also to perform a duty, to perform a responsibility. So the best leaders are leaders who are actually reluctant to lead, but willing to do so under guidance, out of responsibility. So leadership is a service, but it is not what we see today. We see that the great kings were eager to renounce the thrones. As soon as that leadership, whatever need was fulfilled, as soon as there was someone else behind them who was now capable of leading, they would renounce. Today, we see people dying in office. Nobody renounces their position. King Nanga, just moments ago, we read in the last chapter that he, in the dead of night, renounced everything. So like this, we see that the kings in Srimad Bhagavatam, they were eager, perform their duty, do it valiantly, with great dedication, with great success. But as soon as that service could be fulfilled by someone else who was qualified and capable, they would leave. We see that the kings were guided by sages. They were guided by Shastra. How a king ruled was accordance to Shastra. The governing principles were that. But today's leaders, they're guided by the influences of businesses and corporations who want some favor, who will pay millions of dollars for some favors. But we see in Srimad Bhagavatam that the great kings, they were guided by these great sages. So if we look at the monarchies over the last thousands of years, we see this, very actually bad situation. It is not so attractive. If we really analyze what the life was like of a king, we may go visit a palace and think, oh, how opulent their homes were. But the kings were constantly in fear because someone was trying to take their power. And often it was the people closest to them. They're worried, who is going to poison me? Who is going to stab me in the back? You may be in a royal palace, but if you're always worried about who is going to poison you and kill you, what kind of happiness you can have? And there was always this struggle and infighting and, war and violence. It's not a very nice position. And so Srila Prabhupada is commenting in the purport of the 16th verse that, we may have replaced these monarchs with democracies, but it is no better. They used to call it democracy. Not democracy, democracy. There are demons running, Shudras, trying to rule, as predicted in 12th chapter, or 12th canto. And that I think will be discussed tomorrow, so I won't speak too much on that. But that is what we see here. So the sages here are guiding King Vena that you live your life of spiritual practices by engaging your body, mind, and words with intelligence in the service of Krishna. And it will be for the benefit of you and everyone around you. And this is the responsibility of the king. The responsibility of the king is to protect its citizens and protect the ultimate journey of each spirit soul within the kingdom, not just protecting the body. So, with your permission, with a few minutes, I thought we could speak a little bit about leadership generally, and bring, interestingly, if we observe the business leadership topics that are being trained on today, they actually exist in the Srimad Bhagavatam. This is how glorious Srimad Bhagavatam is. That the wisdom of Srimad Bhagavatam is so broad, it applies to everything, including how to be a good leader, even in business, which is certainly not the intent of that, but it is there. I operate in the business world, and I'm often asked, what business books we read. I often ask people that in interviewing them. I like to know what is it that inspires them, where have they, received their knowledge. And sometimes that question is asked back of me, and if I'm in my office, I'll point to Srimad Bhagavatam. And of course that unfolds a interesting dialogue. But it is true, the Srimad Bhagavatam contains so many lessons in leadership. Today we see that the leadership speaks about, servant leader. That is a new buzzword in leadership. That leaders should be servants, and they call it servant leadership. And many books have been written about this. But that is what the kings in Srimad Bhagavatam are doing. They are serving society. Leadership is about service. And that is what we see over and over and over again by the great kings. And today, business leaders are being taught that you should lead in a mood of a servant. That you should lead by doing. Just as the kings were fighting themselves first and foremost, like that, business leaders are being taught that you should do and show by your example. And thus the servant leadership has become a very popular and profound leadership tactic. Leaders are being encouraged to be humble. The narcissistic leaders of yesterday are no longer being admired. Used to be thought that, hey, to be a leader, you must have a big ego and show yourself to be very powerful. But today, leaders are being groomed of how to be a humble leader. Because humility is what attracts followers to that leader. What was the mood of Yudhishthira Maharaj, of Ambarish Maharaj, of all the great kings? They were very humble. They were taught to know their position, know who is the supreme controller, who is the real doer. We are simply a tiny, tiny spark of an instrument in Krishna's plan. So today, in business schools and in seminars and forums, we're being taught about humble leadership. Yet that is what is being spoken in Srimad Bhagavatam. Today, leaders are being encouraged to obtain and find a good group of advisors who can guide them. Leadership used to be about, carve your own path. But leaders are being guided now. You can't see everything. Bring about a group of good advisors who can give you good advice. What are the sages doing here to King Vena? That one's leadership should be based on principles, ultimately on the principles of Shastra. And if you study the world's, material leaders, I took a course many years ago in school, and we read about many, many, many leaders. And the fall of every great leader was after one occurrence, when they stopped listening to those who helped them get there. When they stopped listening to the sage advice of those who helped them get to where they were, they ultimately fell from their position. And we see this in Srimad Bhagavatam. That when the kings hear and are guided by this good advice, everything is prosperous. But if they don't, as we'll see in the coming verses, what happens? Just ask Ravana. He didn't listen to the good advice he was getting. And what happened? So what we see in Srimad Bhagavatam, we see again today. Succession planning. Leaders are being encouraged today to think about succession planning. To develop those below you to be able to replace you. That is a sign of a good leader in today's world. How well are those below growing in their expertise? Not suppressing them. Like this, the kings are being guided to groom their children to be great leaders so that they may then enter to the real purpose of life. Enter Vanaprastha ashram and leave. But today, leaders are holding on to their jobs. But they're being guided that you cannot run your companies forever. And some of the most admired business leaders now are those who have found the right time to step away from their business and let someone else take it to the next level. Those are the respected and admired leaders. But those are the kings that we see in Srimad Bhagavatam. And so like this, and there are many, many other parallels we can see between what is being taught in today's business world are actually coming from Srimad Bhagavatam. So glorious is Srimad Bhagavatam. It presents everything. And so in this section, we are learning about the role of leadership. And we can apply these principles. We may not be a king, but we can apply these principles in whatever activities we may do. In our devotional service, as we work in various temple affairs, we may be leading a festival or leading a committee or having some opportunity. We should live by these principles. Lead as a service. Lead under guidance and direction. Lead for the benefit of all, not for one's own benefit. Lead in a mood of detachment, in a mood of humility. So these principles, we may wonder, how they apply to me. I'm not a king. I'm not living in this. No, they apply to us also in day-to-day life. So Srila Prabhupada, he created this ISKCON and all of his books and teachings to teach us the perfect way to live a God-centered life. It's very practical. And if we can somehow reach out and explain these principles to aspiring leaders in the world, there's some hope of having a perfect society. By the power of Srila Prabhupada and the great potency of this message, it's possible. So, with that, I'll stop here. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki jai. Any comments or discussion we can have?
Thank you, Hare Krishna. Very, very nice explanation. Probably going for development projects. Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Dhanva Pranams.
Hare Krishna. Very, very beautiful class. Especially I liked about mind, body, soul, different commentaries that were highlighting on, and also about the concept of servant leaders, and that is there in today's world. Their important idea. Very, very nice class about the leaders from Srimad Bhagavatam. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna, Dhanva Pranams. Thank you very much.
Prabhuji, Dhanat Ram, all glory to Sri Prabhupada and Guru Maharaj. Thank you so much. Very, very beautiful class. Especially how you connected everything with the nectar of instruction to and the how application of body, mind and words, quoting from Srimad Bhagavatam and various other places too. And finally to the business leadership. I was just kind of wondering, how do we, I mean, I understand that in the leadership and other things, but in the personal life, how do we kind of really apply? I know you said it in the end, probably something, but could you a little bit elaborate more on that part?
Yeah. So, Rupa Goswami in Nectar Devotion is saying that this body, mind, and words application, again, is practical in all aspects of life. And even within the material world, one can, perform such and achieve this position of liberation. And so in our practical life, we all have some leadership we have to perform, right? As a mother and father, you have leadership of children. Maybe in the office place, you have, managing some project or some leadership there. In the temple community, maybe you're, taking on some service, and we have some leadership responsibility. So we should, think very carefully about these positions. Just as I said that, the position of the king is very dangerous. It seems glamorous, but it's very dangerous because the opulence is very dangerous. The need to protect and fight is very dangerous. The threat from all sides is very dangerous. Like that, it's very dangerous. But it's also a great platform to do extraordinary things. In the case of Lord Ram, he was able to lead in such a magnificent way that society flourished dramatically. And so it's a great opportunity. So similarly, in our day-to-day life, we should be mindful of the dangers of leadership. Sometimes we go, I get to lead this position, and we feel very proud or excited. But we should be mindful of the dangers of being in a leadership position. That pride can develop. That this position, may go to my head. Maybe I become comfortable in leadership and I forget how to do menial service. So we should be very mindful of the dangers of that position. But being mindful of the dangers of the position should not stop us from taking that opportunity to do something great by being a leader. So if we have an opportunity to lead something, whatever it may be, we should do it. But do it under the guidance of whoever is putting us in that position. Do it under the guidance of Shastra, under the guidance of Guru. And ultimately do it with intelligence so that we can, achieve something great, not for ourselves, but for others. So, in leadership, be mindful of its dangers so that we don't succumb to those. But don't let those dangers necessarily pull us away from taking that leadership responsibility if it is given to us. Because with that, we can help. If everybody and Srila Prabhupada preaching to, if they shunned leadership, where this movement would have gone. If when Srila Prabhupada asked a devotee, please go to this place and open a temple, and they said, no, I'm not qualified to lead, then how ISKCON would have grown? So they were reluctant, not wanting to leave Srila Prabhupada, but they were leading under the instruction of Srila Prabhupada, and thus great things happened. So like that, we should not necessarily go out and search out leadership. Oh, I want to lead this, I want to lead this. I'm not willing to do this unless I can have this position. No. But if asked, then with reluctance because of knowing the concerns, the fears of such a position, the dangers, of such a position, we can, take to that responsibility, apply the principles of servant leadership, remain humble, follow the advice of those around us, and perform whatever service is being asked of us. So that is how we can kind of apply it in our day-to-day life. So we have to maintain these parallel tracks of thought. One, appropriate levels of concern around the dangers of the position, and endeavoring with this intelligence to perform some activity in the service of Krishna. And remember, Krishna is the source of our intelligence. Dadami buddhi yogam tam, he says in 10th chapter. He is going to give us the intelligence. So then whatever results may come of our leadership, also, if something great happens, no, we had a very tiny role in that. We have a very big role if it fails. But if it's successful, we have a very tiny role. Krishna is doing it. So we can remain humble in the midst of success. And we see this with Srila Prabhupada. If you study the life of Srila Prabhupada, if you read Prabhupada Lilamrita, you will see the world's greatest leader. The greatest leader to walk this earth is His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. He was an extraordinary leader. He was bold. He was aggressive. He took risks. He was entrepreneurial. But he was extraordinarily humble. He was serving. He was following the instructions of his spiritual master. He shows us perfect leadership. And thus he is the greatest leader to ever walk this planet. And we can learn from him how to do it in our day-to-day life. So, stop there. Is that okay, Mataji?
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's very helpful. Hare Krishna.
Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much for the wonderful class. I have a question, Prabhu.
Yes, sir.
So suppose nowadays the young entrepreneurs or young leaders, they say that we are doing charity, like giving money to orphanages or studying, educating the poor children. Like this charity work and we are doing. So what's wrong in that? So nothing wrong. But the thing is, how do we encourage them to go to see them all that into a spiritual perspective? Like how do we tell them that so we have to incline towards spiritual also? Because they will always argue that, okay, I'm doing good, I'm doing charity, I'm good in my thing, and I'm praying God also. But how do we incline them towards the spiritual life?
Yeah, that's a nice question because it's, we see this very prevalent. You people are, they'll sometimes accuse the devotees, you people are not doing anything good in society. We are the ones doing good in society by performing all these charitable works. And obviously that sentiment is out of ignorance. And so with compassion, we can try to illuminate, some understanding for them. And the simple principle is, if you ask them, with whatever efforts you are doing, would you like to have a short-term result or a long-term result? Your charitable efforts are to help somebody. And would you like to have, again, very short-term results so that I'm feeding somebody today but tomorrow they'll go hungry again? Or would you like to have long-term results? That if I feed them today, they may never go hungry again. Of course, very logically, they're going to say, oh, I want long-term results. So you can say, well, we also, in our philanthropy, are looking for long-term results. Actually, we're looking for eternal results. And so compassion directed to the soul leads to eternal results. Compassion directed to the body has limited temporary results because the body is temporary. So we can speak to them about, don't stop them from their philanthropic activities, but teach them how to make that philanthropic activity have a longer, more eternal result by bringing in spiritual consciousness. A simple example, someone who is feeding the poor. Okay, that is a great activity because they are satisfying the need of the body by feeding the poor. But if we teach them that the food you're feeding, if you just offer to Krishna, now you will still feed the body and nourish the body, but you will also nourish the soul. And the benefit of that person honoring prasadam is that it is devotional service. And thus, the future suffering of that person has been reduced because their karma, their sinful seeds, some have been washed away by the performance of devotional service. So, by taking a spiritual approach to philanthropy, we are still addressing the needs of the body, but we are bringing in a higher opportunity by addressing the soul and giving more eternal benefit. Because if I feed a person a plate of food, yes, I have solved their suffering. But if due to their past life, their past sins, their karma, they are destined to be hungry for 10 days, by me giving them a plate of food, I have not reduced the number of days they are destined to be hungry. They're still going to be hungry 10 days. I just deferred their hunger. But if I instead give them a plate of prasad, and now by honoring prasad, I have reduced the number of days they're going to be hungry by some amount. We don't know. That is Krishna's math. But we know some amount they have reduced the number of days they'll be hungry. And so, based on their consciousness, if they're not in an argumentative mood, but in an inquisitive mood, we can show how to layer in this spiritual philanthropy. Because Krishna consciousness and the preaching of it is the greatest philanthropy. It is the greatest service to society. Because it yields the eternal benefit of freedom from birth, death, old age, and disease. Adhyatmika, bhautika, devic sufferings. It permanently ceases the sufferings and brings one eternally to a blissful life. So, but they may not be ready to hear that in totality, so we may layer in different things to help them. Is that okay?
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you so much. Krishna.
There's a question online. Hare Krishna Prabhu. Things related to leadership explained in Bhagavad Gita is also applicable for a head of family, right? Leader not need to be for a society. Leader who has responsibility of home and family members. And spiritual leader who has responsibility of disciple. I believe they're asking about application for.
Yeah, so the question is, does this apply, leadership in society also apply to leadership of family and grihastha ashram or, spiritual leaders? And yes, of course, it applies in all facets. It applies in leading yourself. Just leading yourself, it also applies. But certainly it applies in our, parenting, in our leadership of our family. There's some nice discussions recently on, Krishna conscious parenting. But that's an important part of these principles apply. They apply in all realms. They're universal principles. So absolutely, I do.
Hare Krishna. Anybody having any questions or comments for Prabhuji?
If I can say, I'm going to appreciate it.
I'm sorry, Prabhuji, I didn't understand. Like you said, who gets the reactions?
The king gets the reaction, for the wrong ways of people.
Yes.
Yeah, how is that possible?
Yeah, so they get a percentage of it. So still the majority of the reactions accrue to the individual who's performing that activity. But because leaders have a responsibility to support society in a way that encourages good behavior, that they get both the benefits of it too, because they are the ones creating the environment. It's just like, I'll take it to maybe a business setting. The percentages won't quite apply the right way, but in the business world, the employee gets some share of the income, but also the owner gets the share of the income because they're facilitating the whole situation of that employment. So like that, the leader, because they have a responsibility to facilitate the society in a way that is very, they have a responsibility. So if the society is not following, then it is due to their doings as well. So they acquire a portion. It's a small portion. I've heard 6% from some reference in Srila Prabhupada. I wasn't able to find exactly where, so I was a little hesitant to give that exact number, but it's around there. That percentage accrues to the leader. Still, so the vast majority goes to the individual performing that activity. But due to that responsibility, that is why the leader also acquires both the good and the bad of society. And it actually makes them then an invested leader. They have a vested interest in the success of their citizens.
Okay, thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Brother.
Anybody have any questions or comments for Prabhuji? So if there are no questions or comments, we can end the call here. Thank you so much, Prabhuji, for giving your valuable time and association. We look forward to your more classes, Prabhuji. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Let's pay our obeisances to all the Vaishnavas and Prabhuji. Vancha kalpatarubyascha, kripasiddhibhyacha, bhakti